All right, so have you ever heard about a horse getting nominated for a high political office?
Sounds a bit far-fetched, right?
Like something straight out of a movie.
Well, that's the story of Incitatus, Caligula's horse in ancient Rome.
Ancient Rome, huh?
Oh, yeah, the heart of an empire, gladiators, emperors, you name it.
And right in the middle of all this is a horse.
A horse who was more than just a horse, actually.
Okay, so who was Incitatus, really?
He was a champion racehorse, a superstar in a society obsessed with chariot racing.
That big? Huh.
Think like gladiatorial games level of popularity.
Wow. I do remember reading about the Circus Maximus. That's where the races were held,
You
right?
got it. The Circus Maximus, it could hold hundreds of thousands of spectators.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
Oh, and they weren't just casual fans either. They were absolutely devoted to their favorite teams.
Teams.
Yeah, well, factions is what they were called. They had the greens, the blues, the reds, and the whites.
Okay, like their own little brands.
Basically. Each faction had their colors, stables, and a fiercely loyal following.
And Incitatus, he was part of the Greens.
That's right. And, get this, the greens were Caligula's favorite faction.
Can you imagine the pressure on those charioteers? With the emperor watching, wanting them to win?
Absolutely. And knowing Caligula, he didn't just sit back and enjoy the show.
What do you mean?
Well, the sources we have suggest he interfered, favored Incitatus, even punished those who dared to beat his beloved horse.
Oh, wow. Sounds like Caligula wasn't exactly known for his sportsmanship.
You could say that. It definitely gives us a glimpse into his personality.
All those stories about his supposed madness, cruelty, all that.
Yeah, well, gotta be careful there. Remember, what we know about Caligula comes mostly from accounts written after his death.
Ah, so there's bound to be some bias in there, right?
Exactly. People who might have had reasons to portray him negatively.
So maybe some exaggeration, too.
Could be. But even when you factor all that in, Caligula was a complex figure, full of contradictions. Generous one minute, ruthless the next.
And that complexity, I guess it shows up in his relationship with Incitatus, too, wouldn't you say?
Oh, without a doubt. On the one hand, you have this emperor showering his horse with extravagant gifts. Marble stable, ivory mangers, even a house with a full staff of servants.
No kidding. What else?
Some accounts even claim Caligula hosted lavish banquets for Incitatus, serving him the finest food and wine.
It's like something out of a comedy, isn't it?
It does sound a bit over the top, yeah.
Yeah.
But it also highlights this blurring of boundaries between humans and animals. That's what makes this story so intriguing.
Yeah, that's true. And it wasn't all just about fancy things either. Caligula really seemed to care for Incitatus.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Sometimes bordering on the absurd.
I remember hearing about Caligula wanting to appoint Incitatus as a senator.
Ah, yes, the famous consul joke.
Was he actually serious, though?
That's still debated, but even the fact that the story was circulating says a lot about Caligula's state of mind.
And how the Roman elite must have felt. Imagine being a senator and hearing the emperor might replace you with a horse.
Talk about a blow to the ego.
Yeah.
It must have been both humiliating and infuriating.
And I'm guessing some historians believe this joke was more of a calculated move.
Exactly, a political power play by Caligula.
So he was using Incitatus to undermine the Senate. Is that it?
Right, to show them who really held the power, to basically mock those who dared to challenge him.
Wow. It makes you wonder what that relationship between Caligula and the Senate was really like.
Oh, it was definitely tense. A constant struggle for power.
So this whole Incitatus thing, it was just one little episode in a much bigger power struggle.
Exactly. It was a symbolic act, but one with very real consequences for the political landscape of Rome. You know, it's easy to focus on Caligula and all his antics, but Incitatus' story really gives us a look into how Roman society worked back then.
In what way?
Well, think about the economics behind chariot racing, for one thing.
I don't think I've ever thought about that.
It was a huge industry, you know, corporate sponsorships, betting, even merchandise.
So they had the whole sports entertainment thing down pat, even way back then.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Every faction, they had these wealthy patrons,
Okay.
and they would invest in horses, training, the charioteers, of course.
Makes sense, yeah.
These patrons, they weren't just in it for the fun, though. It was big business, lots of money to be made, political influence.
So kind of like a modern day sports franchise. Like
Yep.
they had their own brands and everything.
Exactly. And Incitatus, he was a champion, a huge asset to the Greens.
Right. The Greens.
His wins, they brought in prize money, new sponsors, boosted the faction's reputation.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the other factions? Did they I don't know, like resent Incitatus's success?
Oh, I'm sure there was resentment.
Yeah.
And probably lots of whispers about Caligula rigging the races to make sure Incitatus won.
Yeah, I bet. With Caligula loving drama and spectacle as much as he did, I bet he didn't do much to stop those rumors.
If anything, he probably loved it.
Probably.
Caligula, he thrived on
Oh, like
controversy.
he was putting on a show or something?
Exactly. He was a master at, well, manipulation. He knew how to use all those rivalries to his advantage.
It's like almost like a reality TV show, isn't it? With Caligula as the producer in the background, like stewing the pot to make things interesting.
That's a great comparison. He knew the power of entertainment, how it could distract everyone from the real problems.
Right.
And speaking of distraction, what about that whole consul joke with Incitatus and the Senate? Do you think he was serious about that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Was he just messing with everybody or what?
Hard to say for sure. Some historians think he was totally serious about making Incitatus a senator,
Wow.
but others think it was just political satire.
But either way, he definitely sent a message, right?
Absolutely. It was his way of showing the Senate that he was in charge, that he could do whatever he wanted.
You said earlier that the Senate was already kind of wary of Caligula.
Oh, yeah. They were afraid of his unpredictable behavior, and his paranoia was getting worse.
So this whole thing with Incitatus just made things worse.
Definitely. Push them closer to the edge.
Like he was seeing how far he could push them before they'd finally do something.
Yeah, something like that.
This wasn't the only time he used Incitatus to make a statement, though, was it?
Not at all. He paraded Incitatus through the streets, all decked out in fancy decorations.
Like he was some kind of war hero.
That's the idea. He was using Incitatus as a symbol, a way to show off his own power and prestige.
So it was all very calculated, wasn't it?
In a way, yeah, it was a pretty smart move.
I guess so. But it makes you question his sanity a little bit too, doesn't it? Was he really losing it? Or was it all just an act to keep everyone scared and in line?
Yeah. That's the question that keeps historians guessing. And we might never know the answer, for sure.
We might not know what was going on in Caligula's head, but his story definitely teaches us a lot.
Yeah, about power, how to manipulate people's opinions, the weird relationship we have with animals.
And Incitatus plays such a key role in all of that, right?
He really does. He becomes this symbol of Caligula's excesses and also represents a society that was on the verge of some big changes.
And that's what makes it also fascinating. It's bigger than just a horse or an emperor. It says something about all of us, about what it means to be human.
Absolutely. It makes you think about power, about the stories we tell ourselves about the world.
We've spent a lot of time talking about Caligula, the Senate, and all the political stuff, but I keep thinking about Incitatus himself.
Yeah.
What was it actually like for this horse? I mean, stuck in the middle of all this human drama.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? I mean, we can try to imagine, based on what we know about racehorses back then, how they were treated, especially the really valuable
It
ones.
sounds like he had a pretty luxurious life,
Yeah.
at least while Caligula was in charge.
Oh, yeah. Everything was top-notch for Incitatus. The best stables, special food, even a whole team of people to take care of him.
But was he really happy, though? Like, horses are social animals, right? Did he have other horses to hang out with, or was he all alone in his fancy stable?
That's tough to say. The historical sources, they're all about Caligula. You don't really tell us much about Incitatus as an individual.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But it does make you think about whether any of this was really good for him. Even if Caligula loved him, was he really putting the horse's needs first?
That's where things get a little bit darker. Remember we talked about the different stories about what happened to Incitatus after Caligula was assassinated?
Yes, some say he was killed, others say he was sold to a breeding farm.
Right. And both of those possibilities are pretty disturbing when you think about it. Was Incitatus just a symbol of Caligula's power, or was he seen as his own being with rights?
So even in death, he was still just a pawn in a human game.
Exactly. If he was killed, it was probably to get rid of a reminder of Caligula. And if he was sold, well, that just turns him into a commodity.
Like his value was just in what he could produce.
Yeah. It takes away all the myth and the legend and just shows us the harsh reality of how animals were often treated back then.
It's kind of sad, really. It makes you wonder if we've really changed that much in how we treat animals.
I mean, we've definitely made progress when it comes to animal welfare,
Huh.
but animals are still used for all sorts of things, often in ways that aren't very ethical.
So Incitatus' story is still relevant today, even though it happened so long ago.
Absolutely. It shows how we can admire animals but still exploit them at the same time.
And it makes us think about how we can do better, right? How to create a world where animals are treated with respect.
Exactly. It's a question we all need to ask ourselves.
Well, this has been a fascinating look into a really strange and interesting part of history. Politics, animals, ancient Rome, it's all here.
It really is a unique story.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on our future episodes.
We'll be exploring more hidden stories from history and culture.
So keep those questions coming and keep exploring.
Thanks for listening.